When Judge Olivia Bennett heard the name Jason Carter, her world tilted. The defendant wasn't just another case. He was the boy who had once protected her, the dreamer who had sworn he'd escape the streets. Now he stood shackled before her, a black man fighting a system designed to break him. As buried memories resurfaced, Olivia faced a harrowing question. Could justice prevail in a world where fairness was never equal? Would the trial uncover the truth or bury it forever? Jason Carter. The name hit Judge Olivia Bennett like a punch to the chest. Sitting at the bench, she fought to maintain her usual composure, but her grip tightened on the gavel. The defendant shuffled into the courtroom, his wrists shackled, his gaze fixed on the floor. When he finally looked up, her breath caught. It was him, the wiry boy from Brooklyn who had once been her closest friend, now standing in front of her, accused of armed robbery and assault. The bailiff's voice echoed through the room, but Olivia barely heard it. Her mind reeled, flashing back to hot summer days and cracked sidewalks. Jason had always been fearless, brash, and unshakably loyal. He had been the boy who stepped in when others wouldn't, who taught her how to throw a punch and take one. The boy who dreamed of escape, even when the world told him it wasn't possible. But the man before her now was a shadow of that boy, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with years of struggle. Yet his eyes, those same sharp, defiant eyes, still held a flicker of the fire she remembered. The prosecutor began to speak, but Olivia wasn't listening. Instead, her mind was locked on a moment she had buried long ago. It was a late summer evening, the kind where the city seemed to hum with restless energy. They had been perched on the rooftop of Jason's building, gazing at the Manhattan skyline in the distance. "Do you think we'll ever get there?" Jason had asked, pointing to the glittering lights. "You mean Manhattan?" she had teased. "No," he had said quietly. "I mean out. Really out. Somewhere we can breathe." She had laughed, brushing it off. But he hadn't smiled. Even as kids, he had seen the invisible walls hemming them in. Walls she had managed to climb over, while he had been left behind. Now, as she looked at him in the defendant's chair, she wondered if this was where it had all led. "Jason Carter, you stand accused of armed robbery and assault," Olivia said, forcing herself to speak. Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "How do you plead?" Jason raised his head, meeting her gaze. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement of the past they shared. "Not guilty, Your Honor," he said, his voice low but firm. Olivia's heart clenched. She struck her gavel to signal the proceedings, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just another case. It was a reckoning. The trial began. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of facts: robbery, violence, and Jason Carter's alleged involvement. The prosecutor, David Foster, painted a vivid picture of the crime scene: a convenience store in Harlem, a clerk injured in a robbery gone awry, and Jason allegedly captured on grainy footage clutching the stolen money. The evidence seemed clear-cut. Witnesses confirmed the same grim narrative. A black man in a red hoodie had committed the crime, and Jason, dressed in similar attire, was the most obvious suspect. Olivia watched him sit there, quiet, stoic, yet his eyes flickered with something that betrayed his calm demeanor. She knew him. She knew that look. Jason hadn't always been a saint, but he wasn't a criminal either. He was a product of a system that failed him at every turn. The surveillance footage was shown again. The jury's eyes locked on the screen, absorbing the image of the figure in the hoodie. It was a faceless blur, but it was enough. The clerk's testimony only reinforced the picture. She had seen the man's face clearly, even if the camera hadn't. Rachel Simmons, Jason's defense attorney, was sharp, methodical. She questioned the validity of the eyewitness testimony and the ambiguity of the video footage. The jury began to murmur, their attention shifting as Rachel unraveled the fragile threads the prosecution had woven. Then came her most damning moment, introducing new footage. Different angles. Clearer images of the street corner where Jason was allegedly caught with the stolen money. The footage showed a figure that looked similar to Jason, but wasn't definitively him. No red hoodie. No clear identification. Jason had been in the area, but there was no proof he had committed the robbery. Then came the arresting officer, Sergeant Kenneth Dixon. His testimony had been a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Dixon had arrested Jason based on his proximity to the crime and his match to the vague description, a black male wearing dark clothing. "Did you search the area for other suspects?" Rachel asked, her voice low but cutting through the tension in the courtroom. "No," Dixon replied, looking away. "But the description matched. Did you check the surveillance footage to confirm his identity?" Rachel pressed. "No," Dixon's voice faltered. The lack of a thorough investigation was damning. Olivia felt the walls of the case begin to collapse. The prosecution had a theory, but it was built on assumptions and incomplete evidence. Jason was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But did that make him guilty? The jury had seen the facts. But Olivia knew that the truth wasn't in the footage, the testimonies, or the evidence. It was somewhere deeper, hidden beneath the surface. Jason was a product of the system, just like she was. A system that didn't care for people like him. And as much as she tried to deny it, she couldn't escape the reality that this case wasn't just about one robbery. It was about everything that had led to this moment, the prejudice, the assumptions, the failures of the system that had shaped their lives. The jury deliberated. Every second stretched into an eternity. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces unreadable, Olivia braced herself. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Carter, not guilty of all charges." The words cut through the air like a blade. For a moment, Olivia couldn't breathe. The world around her seemed to stop. Jason didn't move. No triumphant dismay. No outburst of joy. Just a slight shift in his posture, as though a burden had been lifted, if only momentarily. This wasn't a victory. It wasn't justice. It was something else. A crack in the system. A flaw so deep it had allowed this moment of redemption for Jason. But how many others have been lost in the cracks? Jason stood slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. His eyes weren't filled with triumph, but with something deeper. Recognition. He knew the truth. And so did she. This moment didn't erase the years of injustice he had suffered. Didn't undo the biases that had shaped his life. It simply gave him a fleeting moment of freedom. How long would it last? As Jason turned to leave, he paused. The room felt too small, too confined, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Then, without a word, he walked out of the courtroom. The door swung shut behind him. Olivia remained seated. The weight of the case pressed down on her chest. Jason was free. But what about the others? How many had walked the same path and never seen the light at the end? She had won this battle. But the war, the real fight, was just beginning.